So let's start with COVID. Should students discuss COVID in their essays and application? Maybe. What I did is I put together a complete guide to this, which I will show you real quick. And if you haven't seen this, it's worth a quick skim. Some of the things I talk about here is like, if a student, first of all, should students talk about it? And the quick version is, I think students should, if possible, use the Common App 250 word section. That's got really, they say, we want you to use this so that you can do other things in your application. So students, if they face challenges, can articulate them in a pretty straightforward way. So let me give you a quick example. The student faced some significant challenges, limited access to consistent internet, and and as a result, it was hard to turn in assignments, etc. And it can be straightforward. This is like bullet points. If students want to get a little creative, they can, but I don't want them to obsess over like making this a perfect essay, like a poetic essay. For students who haven't faced severe challenges, but who have been impacted, because everybody's been impacted, and want to talk about like a particular value that they've connected with, one of the things that I encourage students is to think about, well, what are the values that you've connected with? So maybe, for example, you connected more with your family, and maybe you became more conscious of your health. Giving us a short paragraph on how that how you've connected with that could be really cool. So more examples here. I won't get into them too much, but I'll share with you the complete guide after this session. A lot of schools are offering virtual tours. So you'll see we've collected on our website a big list of like COVID specific resources. And one of them here, you can see this big list of virtual college admission events. Thank you to, I'm trying to remember who put this together. Oh, this is Rebecca, put this together. So just a huge list and lots of links. And this is being, pretty regularly updated because it's a pretty popular resource now in the college admissions community. So students can still quote unquote visit, albeit online. There's another resource here about how to research colleges without visiting campus that you can check out. And then we'll talk about fly-in programs in just a second. Standardized tests, if students are wondering, is such and such school test optional or test blind? Fair Test, which is just an awesome site, you've probably heard of it, has the updated list, and you can find out more there. So those are some good ones. In terms of fly-ins, they're still happening. College Greenlight puts together a list each year that has the in-person fly-ins, and this year they did a virtual fly-in. And you'll see that this list is, kind of relatively short, but still some are happening. There's another list that Rebecca Joseph at Get Me to College put together. Thank you, other Rebecca, for putting this together. Rebecca's creating resources. This is, one of the things that I'm encouraging students to do. One student that I'm working with just applied to a virtual fly-in, is to just reach out to the school if you're not sure. Reach out to Barnard if it's not clear on their website and say, hey, are you doing virtual fly-ins? If so, I'd love to apply. It's a great way for students to begin developing that relationship with their regional rep. So I encourage that. What else? And also students can, if they want, I don't know, this is maybe going a little bit too far, but they could look at last year's fly-ins. If they're looking for like 2 steps of research to see if the school hosted one in the previous year, if they're too nervous to reach out, for example. And if they did, for example, let's say Bryn Mawr did do one last year, but they're not sure about this current year, that could give them some confidence that they might be doing a virtual fly-in. Okay, I'm gonna be going fast. So some tips for personal statements, particularly when students are writing about challenges. So one of my favorite exercises, if you're familiar with my resources, you've heard me talk about this, but if you haven't, this is called the feelings and needs exercise. And it's a 15 to 20 minute exercise where students they'll be asked a series of questions. That's me wearing, I think, the same shirt, but in 2 kitchens ago, going through the challenges, effects, feelings, needs, what they did about it, what they learned. This is one of my favorite exercises for helping a student test whether or not a challenge they faced is quote unquote essay worthy. Now that's like really complicated, right? Like, is such and such a good topic? This is a great way for a student to check it. And one of the things that I'm most interested in when a student is going through this exercise is, and it's in the name, of course, what feelings came up for them and what needs did that bring about? And then how did they go about meeting their needs? And that transition right there can help a student, in some cases, branch out into many different sides of themselves. It's a really cool one that I encourage students to check out. And ultimately, this doesn't have to be true for the first draft, but ultimately what I love to see in a challenges-based essay is, challenges, but not just challenges. Let me add this word. I want to know about the challenges and the effects, but only in the first part of the essay. Then I really want to see students move into what they did about it and what they learned. You can kind of give them this 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 structure. That's a pretty good one for students thinking about their word budget. Inside this choose your own adventure tool, which I'll explain to you in just a few minutes. It's part of this, college essay guide for schools thing that I'll tell you about. There are tips for outlining, drafting, revising, and up-leveling a college essay, whether they face challenges or not so much. And you'll get, a registration link to that shortly. Actually, I'm just going to paste it. Go ahead and put that in so that you have it in case, folks need to leave early or something. But inside that tool, there's just separate modules that all cover those different parts of the process. So, some counselors have gone through the tool and been like, oh, cool, I learned some stuff. So feel free to actually go through the tool and to see some of the advice that I offer there. But also it's a tool that you can give to students and let them work through it on their own. Another thing, in some cases, writing about challenges can be, somewhat complicated. There are some students who face real trauma. And so the question is, should they, as one of my friends said recently, should they pimp their trauma, right? And it's a complicated question. There's a webinar that's coming up, and it hasn't happened live yet. If you're watching this recorded, it probably already happened, but if you click the link, you'll be able to see the recorded version, offered by Ashley Lipscomb. This is about gaining a deeper understanding of trauma and seeing the ways that it can, how students can go from, as Ashley puts it, a deficit lens toward writing about challenges in a way that's healing and that can be empowering. And this, you'll see the whole map out here. It's a pay what you can thing, so there's no financial barrier. We want counselors to be able to have access to this. All the funds go to support Ashley's work and the Institute for Anti-Racist Education. So I just wanted to make a quick plug for that. That's sort of it's a 2-hour workshop. That's the full version if you're really interested in that topic and you work with students who are writing about challenges. For English teachers, if you're an English teacher or you know some English teachers and they're trying to figure out what's the difference between a personal statement and other kinds of essays, for me, an English essay, the purpose of that is to make an argument and then support it with evidence, right? Personal statement, it's really to demonstrate the values, skills, qualities, interests, all the stuff that you're going to bring to a college campus. So they're different in that way in terms of their purpose. They're also different in terms of like a thesis. English essays will sometimes have a thesis. It'll be named, usually it's at the end of the first paragraph, right? Personal statements, not so much. The thesis either isn't named explicitly, it's sort of implied, or it comes closer to the end of the essay, sort of in that so what moment of insight near the end. Also, the tone is very different, right? There's a more casual tone to personal statements. Personal statements use the word I a lot. College or English essays, not so much. Vulnerability, you get points for vulnerability in a college essay. Is the personal statement actually personal? Not so much with English essays. And then while English essays help you understand how a student thinks, I think a personal statement, and this is why I'm in this work, helps you understand not just how a student thinks, but how they feel, how they live, how they work, how they play, all the things. Not literally all the things, but a lot of the things. For students who are getting into the process and they're trying to think about those supplemental essays, it can be overwhelming, right? To think about, I got to write all these essays. I'm not going to click on it now, but there's a guide that we put together on how to help a student organize their supplemental essays, and just they put them all on one doc, one like spreadsheet, a Google spreadsheet, and they can start to see not only, oh, I've got all this work to do, but like how some of those prompts can overlap. So when you're writing that essay for, Michigan on a community that's important to you, you can start to see, oh wait, USC is asking about what's something else you'd like us to know about you. That Michigan essay that I write about the community, oh, that could also work for my USC essay. So now I just write one essay instead of two. And that's going to, in many cases, improve the quality of that essay. I think that this can save student more than like 20 hours or more through this process, and it just takes a little bit of planning. So this should be called the Stitch in Time Saves 9 exercise, because it's really, really true. And you've probably seen this with students, but what I've done is like try to put it into like a really pretty easy step-by-step thing that helps them save time. This is something I'm really excited to share with you. This basically for the past few months, even before some of the supplemental essays were released, my team and I were working on supplemental essay guides for lots of schools. Now, these are pretty highly selective schools. We basically looked at on Google for what are the schools that are most frequently searched, and a lot of them are the highly selectives, but we're going to be adding more in the days to come. But if you click on one like Michigan, for example, what you'll see is a complete guide to how to write the Michigan essays. You'll see the prompts, you'll see the examples, tips, lots of different stuff. So each one of these schools has a different one. We've even got one for Colgate, and examples for all of them. So I highly recommend, this is a bookmarkable one. This is one that I haven't talked about a lot publicly, but it's bookmarkable, I think. It's something that I reference in my work with students every day. And if there are certain schools that you'd like to request, you can email and let us know, help@collegeessayguide.com. I can't promise that we'll get to it, but if enough people request like, hey, we really want that Notre Dame one, and the Notre Dame one is coming. It's just that they changed all their prompts, so it's taking us longer to produce it. We'll be happy to share. And if you look through one and you're like, hey, this is the examples for this are not great, or I've got a better example for this one, I'd love to hear from you. So there's that, supplemental essay guides. One of the things that students don't realize, I think, is that the why us essay can be even more important than the personal statement. And why is that? Demonstrated interest. Now, I might say those words and you'll be like, oh yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. If you're not sure what I mean, demonstrated interest is basically something that some colleges track, and it affects their rankings. And so what do I mean by that? Stanford, for example, if it affects their yield, right? So, and that affects their rankings. I kind of skipped a step. So the UCs don't track demonstrated interest, but smaller schools do. Bates tracks demonstrated interest. What does this mean? And there's a whole guide on this that I'm going to point to right here. But it means that they are interested if the student is interested, and that's something that they take into account when they're accepting that student. I'm not going to get into the weeds of why that is. You can check that guide, or you already know. But the Why Us essay is one of the ways that colleges track demonstrated interest. I should get $1 or have like a ding every time I say the words demonstrated interest. So there's a complete guide to not only demonstrated interest and how students can actually reach out to reps, do tours or virtual tours, and start to build that relationship with the school. And there's a complete guide to the Why Us essay. This is one of the guides that I think I'm most proud of. We spent a lot of time and energy putting this together, Why This College essay. And, it's got, how for some students ask, how do you write a Why Us essay if you don't know what you want to study? So we cover that. I cover 3 different approaches with great example essays on how to get into this essay. I got some, things not to do, and strongly recommend it if you haven't seen that before. The other thing that I think students oftentimes don't put a ton of weight on is their activities list, their brag sheet, right? One thing that trips them up is I think they're like, oh, I don't have a lot of stuff to write about. Here's a big list of activities that students may not have considered including, but that count. Things like taking care of younger siblings, getting involved in, church, taking photographs, obviously if it's just a few, that's one thing, but it's like, cleaning houses, reading to the elderly, lots of baking, tutoring. And then you get into some more obscure ones like scuba diving certification and selling stuff, forming a small business, things that they think, oh, that's not school related, so it doesn't count. I find that just showing this list to students, they go, oh, they start to go, okay, they start to think about other things that maybe they didn't think about before. So that's kind of one barrier that I think is important to help students overcome. The second thing is, how do you demonstrate those activities in a way that really pops? Because sometimes students will kind of list those activities, but they're not really resume ready, right? And so this resource helps students in about 30 minutes up-level their activities list. And one of the things that I'm really a big fan of is those verbs. So, if the student says, for example, member of debate, debated topics, attended tournaments, research topics. Yeah, we know that. That's what you do in debate. But instead, if they had, I lead research and case writing, mentor younger debate students, organize mock debates, host an annual debate tournament. Look at those verbs: lead, mentor, organize. Now suddenly I'm getting lots of different values and lots more range. One of the resources that I encourage students to check out is this epic list of activities list verbs. So check this out. This is something that I put together just looking at basically just resume verbs. And so there are 2 uses for this. One is to make your activities list shine in terms of the different stuff you've done, but it's also useful for helping students remember what they've done. Because a lot of times they're like, well, I don't know, I just showed up for swim practice and I just swam. Well, really? But did you have anything leadership related? And I show them this list. Did you establish anything? Did you increase? Did you recruit anybody for, I don't know, anything? I'm really just wanting them to ask these questions did you assist, facilitate, guide, motivate? And then they start to go, oh, okay, cool. So each one of these verbs is going to hopefully give some insight into what they've really been doing with this. There's another little exercise once they've done this to do what I call like a value scan, which basically involves looking at which values are clearly being revealed in the description, and then which values could maybe be more clearly revealed. Like maybe they want leadership to come through, but the verbs aren't really showing leadership in as full a way as they could. So that's a good one. The other third, so this is three things that I think that that students who, the students that you work with, don't pay a ton of attention to is the additional information section. So I think the additional information section can be a game changer for some students. Let me give you an example. Adrian is a student I worked with a couple of years ago who was an undocumented student. And in his additional information section, first he was like, I don't know what to put in there. I don't have anything really to put. Over the course of our conversations, I started to see that there were like lots of extenuating circumstances, challenges that he'd faced. So here's how his additional information section turned out. In 11th grade, could not finish the wrestling season. Why? Mom and older brother were in a car accident. Responsibilities at home stacked up, and I was also working at the time to pay bills, so I was unable to stay for practice. Good context, I want to know about this. And notice how straightforward and simple it is. Water polo, we couldn't get a team going. Returned from summer without coach or lifeguard. Worked with the swim coach to find a lifeguard and coach. I'm already learning some stuff about him there. And then, it didn't work out. So it's explaining those potential, not red flags, but yellow flags. Like, okay, why did you drop water polo? Why was wrestling season gone? Notice that, in 11th and 12th grade, he tried to take college courses, but he couldn't afford the classes, and there was an issue regarding his residency. I want to know about that stuff. One of the things colleges really want to know is how did you make most of the opportunities available to you? This can help contextualize what those opportunities have been. Another thing, I was the first student in my school to ever pass AP Physics 1. Here were some issues during the test that he just explains briefly without complaining. Calculus BC, my teacher felt like they couldn't teach the class, so I took the second science. Anyway, you can see some of this. Oh, the fact that this was when the SAT was 2400, he got a 1910, which was the highest overall test score in his grade. More context, helping me understand all that he's about. He really wanted to get into Stanford, and so he wrote these essays. You can see him here, and he got in, y'all. He got in with like a 3.6, I think. We cried both. It was amazing. He's a junior there now. He's a junior or senior. Wow, already. So anyway, I'm not saying that if a student does he's an impressive student in all kinds of ways, but you can see his whole application here, his activities list, his supplemental essays. I like sharing this with students to let them know that, hey, dreams are possible. I don't want to over push this so that it's like, hey, if you do what Adrian did, you're going to get into Stanford. But, this was a case where I think when I was trying to figure out, wow, what made the difference? I think the additional information section really helped make a difference for him. So here's a guide to 13 ways that students can make use of the additional information section. It's something that I love to share with them and just say, and then I give them also Adrian's example. Hey, is there anything that y'all can think of that you could include here? I think it could make a difference. For those of you who are working with students on the UC personal insight questions, I've got a free 1-hour guide to writing the UC PIQs. The main thing that I want students to know, and that you probably reinforce with them, is that the UCs have 14 points of comprehensive review. 14 things that they're looking for. They put them on their website. It's in the guide. And how can your personal insight questions, there are 8 of them, you choose 4, how can those basically score points on the 14 points of comprehensive review? One of the ways I think for students to find their topics is to really make sure that their UC activities list is on point. It's got to be awesome. And so I've got a whole guide to making the activities list awesome. And then I've got lots of different personal insight question examples. This is, I think, when you Google personal insight questions, it's like the #1 thing that comes up, which makes me think that there aren't a ton of other great examples out there. So you can find great examples there. And coming up in shortly, and just all you have to do is be on my email list and you'll get a notice about this. As part of College Essay Guide for Schools, we're going to offer a free 3-week course on the personal insight questions. So just make sure that you're on the email list. And if you're not on you should be on the email list because you're signed up for this. But if you're not, if somebody forwarded you this, just go to the bottom of the homepage, collegeessayguide.com, put in your name and email, and we'll let you know when it's happening. And if you're not sure and it's already passed and you're watching the recorded version of this, just email help@collegeessayguide.com. And you can, take a look at that. But actually, what I would say is just register for CEG for Schools, the link that I shared, and you'll have access to it. Okay, if you're working with undocumented students, how do you help support them, and should they come out in their should they disclose their status in the personal statement? I put together a guide based on another different student that I worked with who was undocumented, and and advice that I've heard from different counselors. And it's a very personal decision. So I'm not going to say students should or they shouldn't, but what I want students to know who are undocumented is they can. If it's a part of their story and it's a big deal for them, getting in there and going, this is what this has meant to me. And students who have done that, including the last student I mentioned, Adrian, ended up at Stanford. So again, I'm not going to say because you come out as undocumented, then you will get into Stanford, but I want them to know that it's possible to reveal their status, and you're not going to get docked for it. At least I haven't seen evidence of that in the college admissions process in the last 15 years. So there are two podcasts. One is an interview with one student that I mentioned, Taishi. He ended up going to Harvard. By the way, it just happened that these two undocumented students who I worked with ended up at these highly selective schools. Anyway, it is what it is. And there's a podcast that I recorded. The second podcast ever was with Dr. Eliza Gilbert on how to advocate for undocumented students. She's an amazing wealth of resources, and she connected me with this 15 ways to advocate for undocumented youth, put together by Panina Noonan, and lots of great stuff in here. How to find scholarships for undocumented students. How can you involve parents? What are some apps, Facebook groups, YouTube series, documentaries, just tons of stuff to help undocumented students. So just so much. There's many more than 15 ways to advocate for undocumented youth here. Okay, so how do you help students through this process? The thing that I mentioned earlier, this is the CEG for Schools thing. This is a program that we're running this year. It's right now coming up is a 4-week course. So it's basically a series of courses that offered kind of throughout the year. The one that's coming up right now and the one that I'm super excited to share with y'all, we've got a college application kickoff coming up really soon. And then there's basically a month-long course where students will walk through how to write their personal statement on Saturdays, 4 Saturdays in a row, and then how to write their college application and supplemental essays. And that's on Sundays. So on the personal statement one, we're going to walk through personal statement brainstorming tips, how to uplevel your activities. It's some of the things that I've just been talking to you about. And then on the other course, we're going to be talking about how do you write that extracurricular activity essay, or how do you write, the short answers if schools require those, the Why Us essay, and those I'll be covering just in a series of videos. So all you have to do is go to this link, and I'll just pop it into the chat box and sign up for this. If you're watching this recorded, you might have already signed up for it, so I won't spend too much time on this. But one of the things I'd recommend is, if you're interested in doing this, is and it's free, sending it out to your students and letting them do the weekend work with me, and then setting up 1 day a week to do a kind of virtual college essay drop-in hours. We did this and it worked pretty well. A colleague and I had 90 minutes where we set up, students could come and drop in, and I would lead sort of the main room, and I would be reviewing essays by students live just on a Google Doc that was shared, and students could kind of see each other's work. You have to, of course, get permission to review live, so we did that here. But we had this tracking doc, really simple, where we had the students' initials and what was the idea they were thinking about, and was it a montage, not challenges, or narrative, challenges-based essay that they're working on. And then we just wanted to know, what are you working on right now? Are you green? Good, I just need to work. Or yellow, do you need help? And then the counselor, Sandy, and I, who worked together. So the way we did it is I led a session in the main room, and then Sandy would have private sessions for whoever wanted. They would just chat her in the chat box and say, hey, and she would meet with them in a separate Zoom room to basically, work privately on some of their essay notes. So I would work with students in one room where every student could and students like to learn and see what others are thinking about and doing. And the advice that I'm giving oftentimes will apply to other students. So this is good, by the way, going to kind of be the format for the College Essay Guide for Schools thing. So I'm going to be basically, let me just show you this really quick. I'm going to be walking students through this Choose Your Own Adventure essay tool. And there's students who face challenges, students who maybe haven't faced challenges or don't want to write about them necessarily. And I'll just take you into this so you can kind of see what it is. We're going to go through brainstorming on week 1. And then one of the things is I created this tool because I went through 300 past essays to figure out how are students finding their topics, especially if they don't have a challenge to write about. And what I found is that there were 7 different paths that students were choosing that were really that led them to topics. For example, I won't go through all of these, but I'll go through 2 of them. I love something they love or know. So students can identify relatively quickly what's something that you love or know a lot about, like languages, or aviation or science, and they could use that, as a frame for their essay. And so in the tool, what I've got is I've got an example essay. I've got a little analysis of like the qualities that this essay demonstrates. And I've got a second example essay. And then I walk them through a series of short videos. Is this a good topic or not? How do you know? And then how do you write this essay? And so these are all videos. And then if you click underneath it, it kind of gives you the transcript so that students can either watch it or just read through. And I'm going to walk them through. Anyway, another possible thing is like, is there a skill or superpower that you have? Some students, for example, are, they love art making, or they're very meticulous. That's like a superpower that they have, detail oriented. And then you could have some odd ones like, boat building or, translating in many different ways. And that could be the connective theme for the essay. So in short, students, when they sign up for this, when you sign up for CEG for Schools, they get access to this thing again for free. And they can use this tool to write, revise, hopefully up-level their essays. And as they're doing it, my advice is, if possible, just set up a little drop-in hour so you can kind of keep track with them of how things are going throughout the process. What else? Yep, and there's a little video that explains what I just explained, how to use that, the drop-in hours. So here's my offer is, what I'll say is like the next 40 counselors who sign up for CEG for Schools at this link, it's the link that I just pasted, but I'll share it once more, are going to get free access to CEG for Schools for 2 years. And so I'm going to pop that in right now. Oh, wow, sorry, I shared it like a couple other times. But that's, what that includes is upcoming, this year is going to include the 4-week workshop in September. And then we're going to do a 1-week boot camp next year in June, but it's also going to include the UC course in October. Let me just add that in here. So love for you to join, love to connect with your students on it. Last thing I'll say is if you haven't heard of me until this session, but you're excited about some of this stuff, want to connect more, I'll send 5 counselors a free copy of my new book. I'll just link the form. And another main thing that some folks ask about is like, when students sign up for this, what's the catch? Do you sell their information or anything like that? No, students are only going to receive on the emails. They're only going to receive information about the course. And that's it. I don't even opt them into my newsletter or anything. So just so you know, so there's the catch is you have to like sign them up. But this is part of me wanting to have a greater impact. So that's it. What else? One of the things that folks ask about sometimes is like, do you have any tips for like giving great feedback? I've got a guide to that. Again, I'll share this Google Doc with you right after this session. And then sometimes folks ask about transfer essays. So that's that.